February 24th, 1966. Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, is on a state visit to Beijing. While there, he receives a shocking message. Back home, his government has been overthrown. Soldiers now control the streets of Accra. The man who had led Ghana from colonial rule to independence is no longer president. In a single day, the dream of Pan-African unity is shattered, and rumors begin to spread that this was not just a Ghanaian affair, but one orchestrated with help from the West. But why did Ghana's army rise up against its own leader? Was this the result of Nkrumah's own policies, or was it a coup written in the shadows of the Cold War? And what role, if any, did the CIA play in bringing him down? This is the story of the fall of Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was born in 1909 in the small village of Nkroful in the western region of the Gold Coast, which was then a British colony. His upbringing was modest, but from a young age, he showed intellectual promise. After completing his early education at Ajimota School, he traveled abroad, first to the United States and then to Britain. It was here, far from home, that Nkrumah's worldview began to take shape. At Lincoln University in Pennsylvania and later at the University of Pennsylvania, he was exposed to Pan-Africanist thought and anti-colonial activism. He met African American intellectuals and political radicals who believed that black liberation was inseparable from global struggles against empire and capitalism. Figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey inspired him deeply. In London, Kwame Nkrumah worked with George Padmore, one of Pan-Africanism's leading voices. By the time he returned to the Gold Coast in 1947, he was no longer just an ambitious student. He was a revolutionary in waiting. Back home, he quickly rose in politics, first as secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, and then by forming his own party, the Convention People's Party, or the CPP. Through mass mobilization, strikes, and boycotts, which he called positive action, Kwame Nkrumah turned the push for self-government into an unstoppable force. By 1957, the British flag came down, and Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African country to achieve independence. On the 6th of March 1957, Kwame Nkrumah stood before jubilant crowds and declared, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked with the total liberation of the African continent." Ghana's independence was not just for Ghanaians. It was a torch meant to light the way for all of Africa. In his first years, Nkrumah moved quickly. Schools were built, health clinics expanded, and major infrastructure projects were launched. The construction of the port city of Tema, the building of new highways, and most famously, the Akosombo Dam were all symbols of a new Ghana racing towards modernization. For many Africans still under colonial rule, Kwame Nkrumah was proof that independence was possible. But even in those early years, tensions were beginning to simmer. Ambition required money, and Ghana's economy depended heavily on cocoa, the country's single most important export. When world cocoa prices were high, the projects could be funded. But when prices fell, the state began to struggle. Ghana had independence, but not economic self-sufficiency. By the 1960s, the Cold War cast a long shadow over Africa. The United States and the Soviet Union saw every newly independent country as a potential ally or a potential enemy. Kwame Nkrumah's socialism, his ties to the Soviet Union, and later to China all made Washington nervous. At the same time, his suspicion of Western influence deepened. Ghana became a front line in the ideological struggle of that age. Kwame Nkrumah saw Ghana not as a small West African state, but as the launching pad for continental revolution. He gave financial and military support to liberation movements in Southern Africa. He opened Ghana's borders to exiled activists and dissidents from across the continent. His dream was a United States of Africa, a single government and economy for the entire continent. But this vision, inspiring to many, seemed unrealistic to others, especially as Ghana's own economy became weak. Heavy spending on ambitious projects, declining cocoa revenues, and mounting foreign debt began to take their toll. To ordinary Ghanaians, life was becoming harder. To Western observers, Ghana was drifting dangerously close to the communist camp. Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana was now not only a domestic concern, but a piece on the global chessboard. As his presidency advanced, Kwame Nkrumah became more authoritarian. In 1960, after Ghana became a republic, he assumed sweeping powers. The Preventive Detention Act allowed the government to imprison political opponents without trial. Opposition leaders, trade unionists, and even former allies found themselves behind bars. At the same time, a personality cult began to form. Nkrumah's image appeared on billboards and in classrooms. He was given the title Osagefo, or the Redeemer. For his supporters, this was a sign of his greatness, but for his critics, it was proof of a leader slipping into dictatorship. The military and the police, meanwhile, grew restless. Their budgets were slashed, while prestige projects consumed resources. Civil servants grumbled over declining pay, and chiefs as well as traditional leaders resented Kwame Nkrumah's attempts to sideline them. Ordinary Ghanaians faced rising prices and shortages. By the mid-1960s, the man who had once embodied freedom now seemed increasingly isolated from his own people. The breaking point came on February 24, 1966. While Kwame Nkrumah was abroad on a peace mission to Asia, the army and the police took action. Led by Colonel Emmanuel Kotoka and General Joseph Ankara, troops seized control of key points in Accra. Announcing the regime change on Radio Ghana, Colonel Kotoka stated, "Fellow citizens of Ghana, I have come to inform you that the military, in cooperation with the Ghana police, have taken over the government of Ghana today. The myth surrounding Kwame Nkrumah has been broken. Parliament is dissolved, and Kwame Nkrumah is dismissed from office. All ministers are also dismissed." The coup was quick and largely bloodless. The new military government, calling itself the National Liberation Council, justified its actions by pointing to Nkrumah's authoritarianism, economic mismanagement, and reckless foreign adventures. Across Accra, some citizens celebrated in the streets, while others, loyal to Nkrumah, wept and protested. Africa and the rest of the world just looked on in shock. Almost immediately after the coup, some questions began to arise. Had Ghana's coup been entirely homegrown, or had outside powers been involved in it? Declassified documents from the United States suggest that Washington closely monitored Ghana. One memo from the CIA described Kwame Nkrumah's fall as a fortuitous windfall. Another one detailed plans to maintain contacts with Ghanaian officers as well as opposition groups. Some scholars argue that the CIA actively encouraged the coup, perhaps even providing material support. But others caution that while the United States may have welcomed Nkrumah's removal, the driving force came from Ghana's own discontent, the army, the police, and the civilians who had lost faith in their leader. The truth lies somewhere in between. In the Cold War, coups were hardly ever just local events. They were usually entangled in the wider struggle for global influence. For Kwame Nkrumah, there was no return. He found refuge in Guinea, offered asylum by his ally Ahmed Sekou Touré, who made him honorary co-president. From exile, Nkrumah would continue to write, producing works on neo-colonialism, imperialism, and African unity. But his influence had already waned. In 1972, he died of cancer in Romania, far from home. His legacy, however, still endures. For some people, he was a visionary who dreamed beyond the limits of his time, whose vision of Pan-Africanism still inspires leaders today. But for others, he was a cautionary tale, a liberator who became authoritarian, a modernizer whose projects bankrupt his own country. The coup of 1966 was not just the fall of one man. It was a turning point for Africa. It revealed the fragility of post-independence states, the dangers of economic overreach, and the invisible hand of Cold War powers in African politics. For Ghana, it marked the beginning of years of military rule. For the rest of Africa, it was a reminder that the battle for independence did not end with the lowering of the colonial flag. The struggle would continue in parliaments, in army barracks, and in the shadows of intelligence agencies.